Do you remember when Donald Trump insisted that Americans didn't rely on anyone, neither Canada, nor China, nor the European Union? That was his repeated message in the early months of 2025. The US could stand alone, self-reliant, and unshaken. Yet today that claim has shifted dramatically. Just this past Friday, the president signed a new executive order that directly acknowledges the opposite, that the United States is still dependent on resources from abroad. Beginning Monday, tariffs will be rolled back on a wide range of imports. The directive lowers duties on dozens of products, from nickel and gold to specialized chemicals and pharmaceutical components. This is a sharp reversal compared to his earlier approach. For much of his first 7 months, Trump had raised tariffs aggressively, aiming to overhaul the trade system, shrink America's deficits, and force other nations to bend in negotiations. But reality has pushed him to change course. The order admits that certain goods cannot be cultivated, mined, or manufactured in America, or at least not in quantities large enough to satisfy demand. The truth is, the US still leans heavily on foreign suppliers for essential inputs that sustain technology, renewable energy, and national security industries. The document names more than 45 categories of products that will qualify for zero tariffs if they arrive from nations that finalize reciprocal trade pacts with Washington. These exemptions will begin immediately for countries already bound by US trade agreements. Trump's order also makes clear that tariff reductions will depend on how much a trading partner commits to in return, and whether the deal serves broader American priorities. Officials added that the measure also covers some agricultural products, aircraft and parts, and non-patented drug ingredients. Behind all the legal jargon lies an unavoidable truth. The United States is not free from global interdependence. Take graphite as an example. This mineral may sound obscure, but it is crucial for batteries, electric vehicles, and advanced energy systems. The US produces none of it domestically. In 2024, America consumed roughly 52,000 tons, all of it imported. Almost half, 43%, came from China, while Canada and Mexico supplied about 26% combined, and Mozambique contributed another 13%. Even more striking, China dominates the refining stage, controlling over 90% of global processing capacity for the high-grade spherical graphite used in batteries. Roughly 19% of those exports went to the US last year. So while Trump maintains that America doesn't need China, the data reveals a different reality. Nearly half of US graphite originates there, and almost all of it must pass through Chinese processing plants before reaching American manufacturers. And graphite is only one case. Across rare earths, advanced metals, and chemical inputs, the pattern repeats itself. The United States cannot detach from the international supply chain without harming the very industries it relies on for progress and power. Trump's latest order, then, is more than a policy tweak. It's an implicit admission that slogans of self-sufficiency collide with the practical demands of the modern global economy. Saying the United States doesn't need imported resources while continuing to depend on them is like insisting you don't need coffee while pouring 2 steaming cups every morning. Nickel is the perfect example of this paradox. In 2024, Indonesia alone accounted for nearly 60% of the entire planet's mined nickel output, yet the United States still had to secure about 100,000 tons from abroad. Almost half of those imports came directly from Canada, with Norway, Australia, and Brazil making up most of the balance. On paper, recycling appears to soften the blow, since more than half, about 54% of America's nickel use was supplied by scrap. But even here, the dependency does not vanish. In fact, it simply shifts, because the majority of that recycled nickel was sourced from partners like Canada, Mexico, and the United Kingdom. Without recycling, America's reliance on foreign nickel would be virtually complete. And even when it does mine nickel at home, the impact is minimal. The only U.S. nickel mine, located in Michigan, produced barely 8,000 tons in 2024, a tiny fraction of demand. Worse, that output couldn't even be refined domestically. Every ton had to be exported overseas for processing before making its way back. Gold tells a story just as revealing. The U.S. does produce gold, but not nearly enough to satisfy its appetite. In 2024, American mines generated about 160 tons, but another 150 tons had to be imported to keep up with usage. The list of suppliers paints a clear picture. Switzerland led with nearly a quarter of all imports. Canada was close behind with about 1/5. Mexico contributed 15%, and Colombia added nearly 10%. When it came to ores and concentrates, Canada was practically the only source. Meanwhile, the partially processed door imports were dominated by Mexico and Colombia. Aluminum, a metal foundational to modern industry, follows the same dependency pattern. The United States consumed approximately 1.8 million tons of bauxite in 2024. Yet domestic supplies couldn't keep pace, forcing imports of nearly 2.8 million tons to satisfy both direct consumption and refining requirements. Two-thirds of that stream came from Jamaica, while Turkey, Guyana, and Australia supplied much of the remainder. And when it came to alumina, the refined form required for smelting aluminum, the U.S. leaned heavily on Brazil, which provided an overwhelming 68% of the 1.3 million tons imported. This means not only the raw ore but also the processed material was overwhelmingly foreign-sourced. Here is where the contradiction sharpens. The countries at the center of these supply chains, Canada, Brazil, Switzerland, and China, are the very same ones targeted by sweeping tariffs under President Trump's 2025 trade measures. On the surface, the policy was designed to strengthen U.S. industries and reduce exposure to rivals. But in reality, it highlighted just how deeply intertwined America remains with the very partners it tries to pressure. Without these foreign flows, American factories, laboratories, and energy projects would be paralyzed. And it isn't just metals and ores. The latest executive order stretches further, reaching into pharmaceuticals and high-tech materials. Compounds critical for producing generic medicines, such as the anesthetic lidocaine, were included. So too were reagents vital for diagnostic testing. On the other hand, the order authorized tariff relief on some materials considered strategically important, like natural graphite, neodymium magnets used in electric motors and wind turbines, and LEDs essential for lighting and electronics. At the same time, exemptions were revoked for plastics and polysilicon, a key building block of solar panel manufacturing. The result is a patchwork policy that both rewards and punishes, lifting restrictions in some places, tightening them in others, all in an effort to balance strategic necessity with political messaging. Step back and the larger strategy becomes visible. In his second term, President Trump appears to be advancing a dual approach. On one hand, he offers incentives to allies willing to cut tariffs or deepen trade ties. On the other, he tightens the screws on countries viewed as rivals. It is a strategy designed to look bold and confrontational. Yet beneath that image lies a fragile truth. The U.S. cannot escape its dependence. The lifeblood of its industries, nickel for batteries, bauxite for aluminum, gold for finance and electronics, polysilicon for renewable energy, and pharmaceutical ingredients for healthcare still flows from abroad. And the nations most central to these supply chains, like Canada, Brazil, Switzerland, and China, remain precisely the ones caught in the crosshairs of U.S. tariffs. What emerges is not a picture of dominance, but one of vulnerability. The executive order may present itself as an act of strength, but in reality, it lays bare the deep structural reliance the U.S. has on resources it cannot yet generate in sufficient quantities at home. Whether in energy, technology, or medicine, the dependency is written into the numbers. And that is where today's analysis leaves us. Thank you for taking the time to watch and reflect with us. This channel remains entirely independent. We don't take money from corporations or large sponsors. Your engagement is what fuels our ability to keep producing this work. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this video with others. Every bit of support helps more people discover and understand these critical shifts. And don't stop here. On your screen right now is another video we've carefully selected. It dives even deeper into the hidden forces shaping global trade and geopolitics. Click it, and we'll see you there.